The day my father's will was read, it felt like my world shattered. "Everything goes to your sister," Mr. Caldwell, the family lawyer, announced. His words were cold, final, and yet I wasn't surprised. I had always been the afterthought. My sister, Jessica, sat there, smug and poised, practically glowing as she absorbed the wealth and legacy my father had built. At 32, I was standing in the shadow of his choice, watching my life's work, my sacrifices, dissolve into nothing. But what they didn't know was that my mother had a plan of her own, a plan I was about to unveil. My name is Alexandra Morgan, but everyone calls me Lexi. At least, that's what I've convinced myself to be the real name, the one that wasn't defined by my father's expectations or my sister's constant attempts to win his favor. Growing up, I always knew who mattered in our family, Jessica. She was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. And me, I was the quiet one, always in the background, making choices that seemed to disappoint my father. It wasn't always this way. I remember when I was young, my father would watch me with a certain pride. I was always asking questions, dreaming big. He would sit me down in his office, teaching me about business, about Morgan communications, and how everything had a place, a purpose. I think he liked that about me. But over time, those dreams of mine started to clash with the rigid mold he had built around his idea of success. I wanted to become a marine biologist. I wanted to work with the oceans, save what was left, and learn about the natural world that fascinated me. But to my father, that was just a hobby, a distraction. Business was where the real money was, where the real impact could be made. It wasn't until I started my studies at university, far away from home, that I realized just how disappointed he truly was in me. Jessica, on the other hand, fit the mold perfectly. At least, that's how it seemed. She took everything my father said with the utmost seriousness. She married the right man, the one with the perfect family background, and played the role of the perfect corporate heir in waiting. At first, I thought maybe I was just jealous. But then it became clear it wasn't just about Jessica's success. It was about me being constantly overlooked. My father never seemed to see my work, never understood my commitment to something that wasn't tied to profit. I remember him telling me, "The ocean is a beautiful thing, but it doesn't put food on the table." At the time, I was heartbroken. Now, I just feel numb. Jessica's presence in my life only reinforced my father's disregard for me. Every time I was working late on one of my marine conservation projects or building my career on my own terms, Jessica was there, sitting beside him, discussing business strategies, and I was nowhere to be found. It was like we were two different people, in the same family, one who existed to follow orders, to build, to succeed in his eyes, and another who was dismissed because I didn't fit his corporate vision. The first time I truly saw the favor my father showed Jessica was when he handed her the reins of Morgan Communications. I had just finished a project on ocean pollution when Jessica and I sat down at the family dinner table. She was gushing about her latest meeting with investors, about the future of Morgan Communications, and how things were about to get bigger. My father, sitting across from us, just smiled proudly, practically glowing at the thought of his daughter carrying the torch. I sat there, silently. I couldn't tell if I was angry or sad, but something deep inside me broke. It was as if I was invisible to him. I could see it on his face when he spoke about Jessica. How proud he was. My heart sank. I had spent so many years trying to prove that I could succeed on my own, that my work mattered, that the environmental projects I was working on were worth something. But to him, it wasn't enough. To him, Morgan Communications was all that mattered. Over the years, the tension between Jessica and me grew. I didn't need to hear my father's voice telling me I'd chosen the wrong path. I could see it in his eyes. Every time he glanced at me while talking to Jessica about her new venture or her latest promotion. It was a routine, really. My sister would move forward, and I would just stay behind, not fitting into the family's legacy, or at least not the one my father had created. But here's the thing, my mother knew. She always knew. I could see it in the way she looked at me when Jessica was the topic of conversation. "You're not invisible, Lexi," she'd say quietly, just loud enough for me to hear. But there was always a sense of quiet sadness in her eyes, as if she too had accepted the fact that my father would never see me for what I truly was, a person who could make a difference in the world in my own way. When I moved out after my marriage ended, my mother gave me one of her most treasured possessions, a small box with an inscription on the side, "To my Lexi, the one who will always be the true heir of something greater." Inside that box were family photographs, some old letters, and a gold necklace my grandmother had passed down through the generations. I never understood the full weight of her words at the time, but now, looking back, I realized just how much she saw in me. She saw the potential for something different. While Jessica was busy being the perfect corporate daughter, I was building something that mattered slowly, quietly, and away from the spotlight. I didn't need my father's approval or Jessica's validation, but it wasn't just about the work. It was about being seen. It was about making my mark on the world in my own way. Now, as I sat in that cold lawyer's office, I felt the weight of it all crashing down. The inheritance was being divided, just as I had known it would be. My father's business went to Jessica, and I was left with nothing except what Mom had left me in secret. But I wasn't going to let it break me. Not this time. This was my chance. I had been preparing for this moment for years. My work had always mattered, and now I was about to show everyone that my legacy wasn't just about following in my father's footsteps. It was about something much bigger. Let me know if you'd like any changes, and we can continue from here. Ban annoy, deploying the main idea to 800-900 words. Chat GPT annoy. The narrative continues, focusing on the narrator's secret preparation, uncovering hidden truths, and the emotional build-up as she moves forward with her plan. The moment I walked out of Mr. Caldwell's office, I could feel the weight of my father's will crushing down on me, but it was different this time. Instead of letting it suffocate me, it fueled something deeper within. I had spent years feeling invisible in the eyes of my family, trapped in a life I didn't choose, one that didn't reflect who I truly was. But now, with the will freshly read, I could feel a shift. My mother's words echoed in my mind. "You're not invisible, Lexi." She knew. She always knew. It wasn't like I hadn't anticipated it. In the back of my mind, I had been expecting this outcome from the moment my father began grooming Jessica to take over the family business. Jessica always knew the right things to say, wore the right clothes, and played the perfect part. Meanwhile, I was the one who had always done what I thought was right, even when my father told me I was wrong. I tried not to show it in front of Mr. Caldwell. I couldn't let my emotions get the best of me, not with Jessica smirking across from me. Instead, I kept my composure, hiding the storm inside. It would have been easy to walk out of there, feel sorry for myself, and accept my place as the family's afterthought. But something inside me shifted. I wasn't going to take this lying down, not this time. As I drove home, the trees lining the road became a blur of gold and red. Fall had always been a time that brought memories of my mother. I could hear her voice, calm and steady, telling me how the seasons change, but true character stays constant. It was a reminder of the strength she had always instilled in me, even when the rest of the family had dismissed my choices. I ignored the texts from Jessica that buzzed on my phone. We need to talk about your future. Her words were empty, and I had no interest in playing her game anymore. The family drama was no longer my problem. I pulled into my parking space in front of my apartment, my cozy little house that I had worked hard to afford on my own. My mom would have loved it so different from the cold, corporate world that surrounded Morgan Communications. Inside, I didn't waste a second. I went straight to my office, unlocked the bottom drawer, and pulled out the thick manila envelope my mother had left for me. "Don't open this until after your father's gone," she had said, her frail hands gripping mine as she gave it to me. "Promise me, Alexandra." I had promised, and now, finally, I understood why. The envelope was full of documents, stock certificates, investment portfolios, and financial statements. But at the top of the pile was a letter from my mother. Her elegant handwriting filled the page, and I could almost hear her voice as I read it. "My dearest Alexandra, if you're reading this, then your father is gone, and I'm sure he's done exactly what I feared. Your father was a brilliant businessman, but he never understood what truly mattered. He let his pride and his outdated beliefs blind him to the most valuable thing he had, a daughter with vision, integrity, and the heart to change the world. What he also never realized is that, while he was building Morgan Communications, I was building something of my own. 20 years ago, I began investing in sustainable technology companies. Your research on marine conservation inspired me, and while your father dismissed your work as youthful idealism, I saw the future. These holdings have grown considerably, worth far more than Morgan Communications. Everything is in your name, transferred slowly and legally over the years through a network of investments. Your father never thought to question. Jessica can't touch a cent of it. You use it wisely, my darling girl. Make the difference I always knew you could. All my love, Mom." My hands trembled as I sifted through the documents. I could hardly believe what I was seeing. Stock in wind farms, solar companies, ocean cleanup initiatives, everything I had worked for. Everything my mother had seen in me was in front of me now. She had been quietly building an empire behind my father's back, one that was in perfect alignment with the work one had been doing all these years. As I flipped through the pages, the weight of it all settled on me. This was it. This was my moment. A text from Jessica buzzed again, but this time I wasn't ignoring it. My pulse remained steady as I read it. "Seriously, Lexi, we need to talk about arrangements. Dad would have wanted us to work together." I picked up my phone, my fingers moving deliberately over the screen. "You're right. We should talk. Why don't you come over tomorrow morning? I have something to show you." The following day, as I waited for Jessica to arrive, my mind raced with plans. This wasn't just about the money or the property. It was about power, control, and finally having the chance to stand my ground. I had spent years being overlooked, dismissed, and told my work didn't matter. But now I had something much more valuable than the empty title. Jessica had inherited something that had been built with love, foresight, and a vision for the future. My mother's legacy wasn't just about financial wealth. It was about a different kind of success, one that respected the planet and its future. When Jessica arrived, she sauntered in, her usual air of superiority following her like a cloud. Her designer outfit, her practiced tone, she thought she was still the queen of the family. But today, things were different. I led her to the dining room, where I had laid out all the documents. She barely acknowledged the small home I had made for myself as she entered, too busy scanning the place with disdain. "What are you talking about, Lexi?" she asked, her voice already laced with suspicion. I gestured to the papers on the table. "Take a look, Jess. Mom left something for you to see." Her fingers hesitated before reaching for the documents. I watched her face carefully as her expression shifted from cocky amusement to shock, her face drained of color, her hands shaking as she fumbled with the papers. This can't be real, she stammered, her voice unsteady. I stood there, my voice calm but firm. Oh, it's real. Every document is verified. Mom knew exactly what she was doing, and now so do I. Her perfect posture faltered as she sank into the chair, disbelief written all over her face. But Dad's company? Morgan Communications, it's yours? I nodded, just like Dad intended. But Mom's legacy, well, that belongs to me. And it's worth 10 times what you inherited. The silence in the room was thick, and I could feel Jessica recalibrating, trying to hold on to her old worldview. She opened her mouth, searching for a way to regain control, but I was done letting her have the upper hand. Jessica, I said, my voice steady and strong, you got what Dad wanted you to have. Now, this is my path. I won't work for your company. I won't merge our work just to keep you happy. This is my vision. The frustration and anger she'd been holding back for years were bubbling to the surface. But she couldn't hide the fear in her eyes, the realization that everything she had worked for was built on the crumbling foundation of her father's outdated business tactics. She stood abruptly, her heels clicking against the floor as she made her way to the door. You're making a mistake, she said, her voice cold. Maybe, I replied with a smile, but at least it's mine to make. As the days passed since Jessica's visit, the tension in the air became palpable. I knew the confrontation wasn't over. In fact, it was only just beginning. The calm I had felt the moment I closed the door behind Jessica quickly started to fade, replaced with the quiet hum of anticipation. I had planned for this moment my entire life, even if I hadn't realized it at the time. My mother's words, her legacy, had always been there, waiting for me to understand. Now, everything was shifting. The next day, I woke up early. The sunlight filtered through the blinds in my small, cozy apartment, but there was no peace, no relief, only a sense of urgency. It was time for me to take action. I couldn't let my family continue to think they could control me or dismiss me as some failure who didn't fit into their carefully constructed world of success. I pulled out my phone, glancing at the stack of unread messages from Jessica. One of them caught my eye. We need to talk about the future of Morgan Communications. You can't just walk away from all this, Lexi. Dad built this for us. It was the same empty rhetoric she had been feeding me for years. I almost didn't bother replying, but instead, I typed out a response. I'm done talking, Jess. Come to my place tomorrow morning. We need to have a real conversation. With that, I put my phone down and turned to the papers that had been on my desk for the last couple of days. They were the keys to the empire my mother had built. It wasn't just about the money, it was about doing things right and doing things differently. For too long, my father had treated me as if I was invisible, incapable of understanding the true value of success. But my mother had seen what I was capable of, long before anyone else did. As I sat at my desk, surrounded by the weight of the documents, I thought about everything I had gone through to get here. The years of being dismissed, of watching my sister Jessica take every opportunity that should have been mine. The constant feeling that no matter how hard I worked, no matter how successful I became in my own field, I would always be in my father's shadow. But now, things were different. I was holding the cards, and it was time to show Jessica the truth. At 10 a.m. the next morning, the doorbell rang. I had spent the last few hours going over the documents again, making sure everything was in order. I had a plan, one that didn't involve playing by the rules my father had set. I wasn't going to let Jessica continue to push me around, to think she could simply inherit everything with a smile and a well-crafted speech. When I opened the door, Jessica stood there, her usual confident smirk gone, replaced with something closer to uncertainty. Her perfectly manicured nails were tapping nervously against the strap of her designer purse, and her eyes flickered around my apartment with disdain. As usual, she was dressed to impress in a sleek, black dress that screamed corporate success, but today I could see the cracks. "Lexi," she said, her voice still carrying that air of superiority, but there was a hint of something else, fear. "We really need to talk about what's going on. You can't just walk away from all this. This is the family legacy." I didn't invite her in right away. Instead, I gestured for her to follow me into the living room where I had laid out the documents. Her eyes darted to the table, but she didn't comment. She stood there, arms crossed, as if waiting for me to explain. "What's all this?" she asked, her tone still cool, but with a hint of tension. "Take a look, Jess," I said calmly. "This is the real family legacy." Her fingers hesitated for a moment before she picked up one of the documents. I watched as her confident posture began to falter, her face slowly draining of color. The more she read, the more disbelief spread across her features. She shook her head as if she could will the papers away, but it was no use. This can't be real," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "Mom was just a housewife. She didn't know anything about business." I almost laughed, but I kept my expression composed. It was hard to hold back the emotion that was rising in me. For years, I had watched my father and Jessica dismiss everything my mother had worked for, everything she had built. Now, it was all laid out in front of them, undeniable. "Oh, it's real," I said. "Every document is verified." Mom knew exactly what she was doing, and now so do I. She stumbled backward, almost knocking over the chair behind her. Her eyes were wide with panic now, and I could see the cracks in her carefully crafted facade. But Dad's company, Morgan Communications," she stammered, her voice growing more desperate. "That's still yours, right? I mean, you're still going to join me, right?" I shook my head. "No, Jess, that company is yours. But Mom's legacy, that belongs to me, and it's worth about 10 times what you inherited." For a moment, the room was silent except for the sound of Jessica's nails tapping against the table. I could tell she was trying to recalibrate, trying to figure out how to deal with this new reality. But it was too late for that. I had already made my decision. "Do you know how much my mom invested in wind farms, solar technology, ocean cleanup initiatives?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. She understood what needed to be done, and she did it quietly, behind the scenes. "She built something that is worth far more than your company, Jess. And now it's all in my hands." Jessica opened her mouth to argue, but I cut her off. "I'm not interested in working for your company. I'm not interested in merging our paths just to make you feel better about yourself. This is my path, and I'm not looking back." Her face flushed with anger, and for the first time in years, I saw the vulnerability behind her mask. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. She stood up, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. "You're making a mistake," she said coldly. I smiled, feeling a weight lift off my chest. "Maybe, but at least it's my mistake to make." She turned on her heel and stormed out of my apartment, slamming the door behind her. I stood there for a moment, taking in the silence. It felt like the first time in years that I had truly taken control of my life. But as much as I was glad to see her leave, I knew this wasn't over. The battle was just beginning, and I was ready. The following day felt heavier than usual. After my confrontation with Jessica, I knew this wouldn't be over so easily. I had just opened a new chapter in my life, one where the tables had turned, but the weight of my decisions was starting to settle. My mother had always told me that in the end, it wasn't about the wealth, it was about creating real, lasting change. And now, I had the power to do just that. It wasn't just my inheritance, it was my responsibility. I spent the day preparing. My office, where I had built my own empire, was filled with papers and files related to the investment projects my mother had been quietly funding. These were the investments she had been making in sustainable technologies and environmental conservation, things my father had scoffed at for years. But now, these investments were about to become the backbone of something bigger than anyone had expected. My phone buzzed as I was flipping through a set of reports. Jessica again. "We need to talk, Lexi. You can't just walk away from everything. Dad would never have wanted this." I rolled my eyes. The nerve of her. It wasn't even about Dad anymore. It was about power, about legacy, and about proving something to both of us. To her, I was always the screw-up, the one who had failed to live up to her expectations. But what Jessica didn't know was that this was never about her. It was about reclaiming what was mine. And it was time to show her exactly how much my mother had prepared for this moment. The next morning, my lawyer, Sarah Harrison, arrived at my apartment. She had been with my family's legal team for years, but unlike Caldwell, she was someone I could trust. Sarah had worked with my mother on many of these investments, but most importantly, she understood the strategy my mother had set in place to protect my future. We sat down in my small but comfortable dining room. I could feel the weight of the day's decisions pressing down on me, but Sarah's calm demeanor gave me the sense that I was on the right path. She pulled out a thick folder of documents. "You've got a hell of a fight ahead, Lexi," Sarah said, her voice low but confident. "Jessica is going to fight this tooth and nail, but I've been through these documents with a fine-tooth comb. Your mother was strategic, far more strategic than anyone gave her credit for." "I know," I said, nodding. I didn't realize how much she was preparing until now. Sarah smiled. "She knew exactly what would happen if your father ever passed, and she set it all up for you. She had offshore accounts, investments in wind farms, solar technology, everything you've worked for, Lexi. And now it's time to take it public." I glanced at the papers, at the ocean of assets and holdings my mother had kept hidden from everyone, even from me. The world of corporate finance had always been my mother's domain, but it was a world that she had carefully kept separate from my father's company, Morgan Communications. And now, as I stared at the documents, I realized she had done it all with one goal in mind: to give me the tools to change the world, just like she always said I could. "The next move," Sarah continued, "is to go public with these investments. Start making some waves. If we let the right people know about this, Morgan Communications will have no choice but to adapt to what your mother left behind." I nodded, feeling the gravity of her words. This wasn't just about a family inheritance anymore. It was about shifting an entire industry. And Jessica? She was going to be left in the dust. We spent the next few hours planning how to move forward. Sarah was going to set up meetings with potential investors who had already expressed interest in sustainable tech. She was also going to reach out to media outlets to get the word out about the environmental initiatives my mother had been funding. But none of this would be public until the right moment. We needed to catch Jessica off guard, make sure her next move was exposed before she had a chance to undermine what my mother had left behind. The phone call that changed everything came later that afternoon. I was sitting at my desk, running through spreadsheets when my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated for a moment before answering. "Lexi, it's Dr. James Chen," the voice on the other end said. "I'm one of your mother's research partners." I straightened in my chair. Dr. Chen had been one of the leading figures in ocean conservation, one of the many experts my mother had supported over the years. The fact that he was calling me now, after everything that had happened, meant something big was coming. "We've made a breakthrough," Dr. Chen continued. The project your mother funded, it's showing incredible results. We're on track to revolutionize ocean cleanup technology. With the right resources, we could scale this to a global level. I felt my heart race as I processed his words. This was it. This was what my mother had been working towards, and now I was the one who had the power to make it happen. That's incredible, Dr. Chen, I said, my voice steady. I'll make sure you have the resources you need. We're going to take this to the next level. He thanked me, and I hung up the phone, my mind racing. This was the moment I had been waiting for. My mother had left me everything I needed to make a real difference, not just for myself, but for the planet. And now I was ready to take her legacy and run with it. The next few days passed in a blur. Meetings with investors, preparing the press release, coordinating with Dr. Chen and his team to get the project to scale. But through it all, one thing was clear. Jessica had no idea what was coming. Then came the inevitable, another text from her. We need to talk. This is getting out of hand, Lexi. You can't just keep doing this. I smiled to myself. She was panicking. She knew it was over, and yet she didn't even realize it. I typed my response. You're right. We do need to talk. But not about what you think. Come by tomorrow. I wasn't going to let Jessica play the victim anymore. The truth was about to come out, and she would have no choice but to face it. Tomorrow was the day everything changed. Again, the day Jessica came to my apartment to talk, I felt a strange calm wash over me. The moment was approaching, the one that would shift everything, not just for me, but for her as well. I knew what my mother had left me wasn't just money, it was a legacy, and one that I had to honor by taking bold steps. I had worked hard for everything I had, and now, with the resources she had secretly amassed, for me, I could finally do something bigger than both my parents' visions combined. I let Jessica walk in, her heels clicking sharply against the floor, a sign of her usual confidence, or at least what she wanted to project. She looked me up and down, her gaze filled with calculated superiority, as if she were trying to assert her dominance even in my modest space. But I wasn't intimidated anymore. Not by her, not by my father, and certainly not by the image of success she had always tried to sell to everyone, including herself. Lexi, I know this must be tough for you, she said, with that practiced sincerity that she saved for moments like this. But we have to put our differences aside. You and me, we could make this work. Our parents would have wanted us to. She didn't even wait for me to answer before continuing, her voice sliding into that familiar tone of authority. I think it's time to consider your future. You can't keep ignoring your responsibilities, pretending like you don't need us. I mean, you're not getting any younger, Lexi. The words stung, but I didn't flinch. It was what I had expected from her, what I had grown used to hearing over the years. I turned toward the table where I had laid out the documents I had been carefully preparing for this moment. My pulse was steady. This wasn't just a conversation, it was a confrontation, one where the truth had to come out. I gestured for her to sit, my hand steady as I pointed to the stack of papers in front of her. Jessica, there's something I need you to see, I said quietly. Her eyebrows furrowed as she reluctantly sat down across from me, her perfectly manicured fingers curling around the edge of the papers. She glanced at the first page, and I saw her smirk fade, just a little. Her hands shook as she flipped through the documents, her face going from confusion to disbelief in mere seconds. The truth was settling in. My mother's legacy, everything she had worked for, wasn't what Jessica had expected. And she was starting to understand just how much my mother had protected me. This can't be real, Jessica stammered, her voice wavering as she tried to make sense of the pages in front of her. Mom, she was just a housewife. She didn't know anything about business. These stocks, these investments, they were all just She paused, taking a sharp breath, trying to hold on to the facade that had worked for so long. I leaned forward, my voice calm but unwavering. It's real, Jess. Everything she did for me. I may not have had a seat at the table when it came to Morgan Communications, but I was building something bigger than any of us could have imagined. And now, it's mine. I could see the moment when she realized that she had been left with nothing but the crumbs of my father's empire, while I had inherited everything my mother had worked on in secret. The stocks in renewable energy, the ocean cleaning technologies, the environmental funds, all of it was in my name. My mother had quietly built an empire that Jessica had dismissed as idealistic nonsense. Jessica's face flushed red with anger, her control slipping. This is all just a game to you, isn't it? You've been waiting for this. You've been planning it from the beginning, haven't you? All those years pretending like you didn't care about the family business, pretending like you didn't want to be a part of it. You always knew what Mom was doing, didn't you? I didn't answer immediately. I let her words hang in the air for a moment before I responded. I wasn't pretending, Jess. I just had a different vision than Dad. And maybe if you hadn't been so focused on impressing him, you'd have seen it too. Her eyes narrowed as she stood up, her voice turning cold. You're making a huge mistake, Lexi. You think you can just come in and change everything? You think you can walk away from the family company and do whatever you want? You can't just throw everything away for some idealistic fantasy. Actually, that's exactly what I'm doing, I replied evenly. And if you want to fight me for it, I'm ready. Jessica turned away, her heels clicking louder than before. But this time, her steps were slower. She was calculating, trying to figure out her next move. I could see it in her eyes, the realization that I was no longer the easy target. I was no longer the daughter who had been easily dismissed and overlooked. You're not going to win this, she spat as she reached the door, throwing one last glance over her shoulder. Dad's company, Morgan Communications, it's built on his legacy. You'll never be able to take that from me. I don't want your company, I said softly, but firmly. I don't need your company. What I'm building, what I've been building, is mine. And it's far more important than any legacy your father ever left behind. With that, she stormed out. But I wasn't done. I knew there was more work to be done, more moves to be made, and I was ready for whatever came next. That night, I stayed up late, reviewing the next steps in my plan, the documents my mother had left behind, the investments, the contacts. Everything was set up. My phone buzzed with messages from family members, trying to reach me, trying to get me to back down. But I didn't. I had a purpose now. The next day, I met with my lawyer and made arrangements to have the assets publicly disclosed. It was time to take my mother's legacy out of the shadows and into the world. I wasn't just going to sit back and let my father's company crumble. I was going to show the world that change was possible. The phone call from Jessica that night was no surprise. We need to talk, she said. We can fix this, Lexi. We can work together. I smiled to myself. No, Jess, I replied. This isn't something that needs fixing. It's something that's already been set in motion, and I'm not stopping now. The next day, as I stood on the stage to announce the launch of the first of many ocean cleanup projects, I knew that this was my moment. My mother had given me more than just a financial future. She had given me the power to change the world, and now I was going to do exactly that. I looked out at the crowd, at the reporters, at the scientists gathered before me. This wasn't about my father's legacy. It wasn't about Jessica's thirst for control. It was about doing what was right, and about creating something that would last, long after all the battles had been fought. And as the project began, I could hear my mother's voice in my head. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't about winning, it's about changing the game entirely. this was just the beginning. In the end, what truly matters is not what we inherit, but how we choose to shape the legacy we're given. The battle over inheritance, whether it's property, business, or family, often blinds us to what is really important. It's easy to fall into the trap of wanting to prove ourselves, of fighting to reclaim what we feel was taken from us. But sometimes, the most powerful thing we can do is walk away from the fight. This story reminds us that true strength lies in our ability to stand our ground, not just for ourselves, but for the values that really matter. It's about doing what is right, even when others expect us to follow their path. When we make our own decisions, not out of spite, but out of integrity and vision, we don't just change the course of our own lives, we can change the world. It's easy to get lost in resentment and anger, but don't forget, that's not the path to peace. Patience, preparation, and grace are the true markers of success. Don't let anyone define your worth. You have the power to create a future that aligns with your values. And sometimes, that's the most revolutionary thing you can do. If you've ever felt overlooked or underestimated in your family, let me know in the comments. And if you found this story empowering, don't forget to subscribe to Family Drama Stories from Reddit for more real stories of standing up for what's right.